Welcome to the Center of Light Radio with spiritual teacher, intuitive, musician, composer, and best-selling author of The Divine Principle, Anchoring Heaven on Earth, your host, Keith Anthony Blanchard.
Coast to coast, pole to pole, all around the world on the internet, thanks to the marvel of technology. I am coming at you live from my little guest house in Memphis, Tennessee. This is Keith Anthony Blanchard, and you are listening to Center of Light Radio, Center of Divine Unfoldment and Reinforcement. Said another way, the superhighway to knowledge for that which matters most, and that would be you. You are important to me. That being said, go to centeroflightradio.com. Look on the bottom right-hand side of the opening page. You will see a subscription form. Fill that thing out. I will send you some really, really cool newsletters. My promise to you, as always, I will not be sending you anything that's junk. You can promise. I do a lot of research to uncover and discover and explore things that are I consider valuable information. And I like sending that to you, and it costs you nothing. There's nothing else I want from you except to glean the knowledge that I put a lot of time into finding. My passion's in it, and you can bet by the quality of information that I'm giving you through that avenue, you will feel my passion. Power up, y'all. Spread the light. It is Monday night. Strap in my spiritual astronauts as we launch for inner space. While you're at Center of Light Radio's website, centeroflightradio.com, the very bottom, smack in the middle, you'll see a movie banner. And the meek shall inherit the earth, the prophecy realized. It's a movie I'd done about 5 or 6 months ago. Took me a month to do. Very, very cool movie, if I say so myself. Check it out. It's all about unity. My gig for the rest of my life is doing my part to create unity in the world among all races of people, all colors, all religious codes. That's just my gig. I'm the unity guy, I guess you can call me. Remember, if you want to call into the show tonight would be a really good opportunity to ask my guest some really cool questions if he's open to that idea. The number you dial is 888-919-2355, 888-919-2355. Remember, if you are not at home at any point and by your computer and you want to hear your favorite show, hopefully that's Center of Light Radio or any of the fine shows you can find here in Inception Radio Network, go to the App Store on your phone and look up the Inception Radio Network app. It's free, and you'll have everything right there at your control, in your hand. Chat room, listen, live link, news, podcasts, much more. There are many ways to connect to Inception Radio Network. That is for sure. And now it's time to get down to Center of Light Radio business. Today, my guest is Mr. Michael Mullen, and we will be talking about the War of Angels. The War of Angels. This is going to be an exciting show, at least for me. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest today. Mr. Michael Mullen was visited by an extraterrestrial being who pulled him from his body and into another world. The alien being told Mr. Michael, do not write that, parentheses, Indianapolis. Write this, War of the Angels. For over 40 years, the being pulled Mr. Michael Mullen out of his body into various spiritual realms and commanded him to write what you see. The accumulated results from those journeys are published in Mr. Michael Mullen's latest book, War of the Angels, Part 2. Allah. Mr. Michael Mullen, welcome to Center of Light Radio, sir.
Well, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Let's get right down to it. So an alien comes to you and pulls you out of your body. What was that experience like, the initial pulling of it? Did you know he was going to do this, or were you surprised to find yourself conscious of another experience?
I was totally shocked. I've always been a Christian, but I was the wishy-washy type of Christian that I called the book of Revelations the book of revolutions, and everybody laughed at me. That's how little I knew. So when he started pulling on my body, I had no idea what was going on, and I fought it. I was downstairs with a couple of friends, and we were watching the coronation of Pope John Paul II. And we commented that, wow, you'd think he was Moses coming down from the mountain. And right then, that's when I felt this tug on my mind, and I fell out of my chair onto the floor. And then I tugged back. And it was a tug of war over my spirit in my body, my mind, my soul. And I didn't want to pass out in front of my friends. It was the first time I'd met them. So I headed for the door and fell on the floor right by the door and couldn't get out. So they came over and opened the door for me, and I said, I got to go. And I tried to go up the stairs. I lived right upstairs from the steps weren't very many. And I fell down on the stairs, and they picked me up. And then I fell down again in the hallway. And finally, they grabbed my key because I couldn't insert it into the lock. And as soon as they opened it, I slammed the door behind me and just fell down on the sofa. And then that's when he pulled me from my body. I had a very nauseating sensation. It's just like that was my seatbelt. He made me so sick I couldn't resist the spinning and the spinning down this tunnel. And then finally he pulled me out of my body, and I was on the other side. It was in a very, what I call the dark world. And I heard, "Be still. Know that I am. Murder." And that's after he filled me with thoughts of John Paul I. And that's the first clue that what I'd been watching was a coronation of a pope who'd been put into office by a group that had murdered the first pope. And there was 100,000 people marching in the streets of Rome, and Dan Rather was there reporting it. And you never heard about it anymore. They said, the group was Opus Dei and the P2 Masons. And I knew about it 28 years before Dan Brown ever wrote about it. Nobody had heard of Opus Dei by then. But anyway, that was my very first encounter, was be still, know that I am, murder.
How long did it take you to get used to this process of being removed from your body? During the first experience, you found it somewhat comfortable enough to allow it? And also, did it feel like there was an agreement made maybe before you were born on another level? But how long did it take you to actually start being okay with this out-of-body
I was
pulling?
never okay. Never. And you said, was I born? Something about being born. My mother and my grandmother told me something about the day I was born. My grandmother said there were angels in the room flying and waving their arms. And then my mother said when they put me on her chest, she heard the voice say, "This one is mine." So, I never knew about that until later when some more things happened. But whenever I got nonchalant and thought no big deal, that's when Satan came at me, and I was just scared to death. Every time I moved.
Michael, who was this alien being that you spoke about? Is it from a particular race, or is it an interdimensional being that we might consider to be demonic? I mean, can you give me some description of who this being was that told you not to write this book, but to write that book?
He is the person whose image is embedded on the Shroud of Turin, the burial cloth of Jesus.
That's sweet.
And that's exactly who it was. But I didn't know then. It took me a while. Matter of fact, the day I found out was when I went over to my landlord's house. He was a Pentecostal minister. And after church service, he had the newspaper opened up to the movie section. And that's when I saw an ad for the movie, The Shroud. And I said, that's him, that's him, that's who I saw. So that's when I knew that it was Jesus Christ. But before that, now in my book, the first one, I was doing a little bit of bait and switch because it was written for a secular. And I didn't want to come right out and say Jesus Christ in page 1 because nobody would read it. So I said alien being, and everybody wants to hear about UFOs.
You're right.
So in the latter part of the book, I started calling him Jesus Christ. But at first, it was alien being.
So tell me, you wrote about some of the questions I'm going to ask you in your books. One is that you stood in the great white throne room on the right-hand side of Jesus. Tell me about that experience.
These are things that you've never heard before. Nobody in your audience has ever heard before. And I was afraid that everybody'd throw rotten tomatoes at me many years ago when I started talking like this. And I was amazed that like 90 to 95% of the people believed me. And they started marching into my website message board, 2 to 3 million unique visitors per month, saying, me too, I had this encounter too. And it was like an army of believers came in saying that something happened to them. Now, the great white throne room is exactly what it says. It is so huge, you cannot see the walls. It's all white. The throne that Jesus sat in was trimmed in gold. Everybody was dressed in white. There was 100 gazillion trillion angels all lined up to the left of the throne, and just as many all lined up to the right of the throne. And there were so many you couldn't see the end of the line, and you could not see the walls. That's how big it was. You couldn't see the ceiling. That's how big it was. The floor is made entirely of crystal. And we were standing there looking down through the crystal, and you could see everything happening on earth through there. Jesus could see everything and direct everything from earth. And it was the beginning of World War III. And we saw these red missiles, that was Russia, just coming at America, just one after another. Ezekiel 38 says, I will cause your arrows to fall. And Jesus sat on his throne and just waved his little pinky finger, and all the missiles fell harmlessly. And we just watched missile after missile from Russia falling without going off. Then all of a sudden, we saw some more come in, and Jesus just sat there, didn't raise his arms, and he let them in and hit. I saw New York hit and destroyed, and Los Angeles was 2/3 of it was on fire. The Far East Los Angeles wasn't on fire. Chicago was gone. North of Houston was gone. That was World War III. Then when that happened, after they hit in these cities, Isaiah 58 talks about America will be cut and pruned, and that's exactly what happened. The coastlines are cut and pruned. And then all these white missiles went off. And you could just feel that the white missiles were angry. And that's where 5/6 of Russia is just turned to dust. It was like the biggest nuclear mistake ever. And here's when the rapture takes place, because I witnessed it twice. When the missiles hit and the mushroom cloud goes up, but before the sonic boom, the rapture takes place between the speed of light and the speed of sound in the twinkling of an eye. If you'll think back to 4th of July fireworks, you watch the pretty blue ones and the green ones and the red ones, and then you see this big white ball, and you instinctively clench and close your eyes because you know what's going to happen after that big white ball flashes. You're going to hear this boom that just rocks the countryside. And that's how the rapture happens, in the twinkling of an eye. Mushroom cloud, rapture, boom.
Though there is no time set in stone, did you get a feeling, a premonition, some inkling of when this may occur?
No. All I have is an opinion, and I hate to state opinion.
Understood. Why were you selected? Do you have any knowledge about why? Is it because you were open? Is it, again, this is an agreement you made before you were born? Why were you able to be graced with such a vision and sit next to the master?
I don't know. I was probably the lowest person he could find.
I understood. You also talk about in your book your first encounter with the beast. Tell me about that, if you would, please.
Wow. That was extremely scary. Jesus took me out of my body, and it was a pleasant journey this time. He showed me some things, nothing scary. I was in the city, like New York City, with these giant sidewalks with 20 people walking by, you know what I mean? And there was this old lady in front of me, and she was slowing me down, but I didn't get mad because, you know, she was an old lady. So I tried to pass on the right, and she cut me off on purpose. Then I went around and tried to go by on the left, and she changed directions and cut me off. And at that point, I got really mad. And then I heard the voice say, "Be patient." And it wasn't a little old lady. It was the voice that I'd been hearing. It was Jesus, but I hadn't known up until this time that it was Jesus. And he turned around, and he was wearing this beautiful purple robe, cloak over a white robe. And it was like, it was out of place because he looked like a 200-year-old sailor. His skin was, you know, all worn. And then he had this, you know, royalty cloak. And then he turned around, and I saw he didn't have long hair. He just had the collar pulled up, so I just assumed it was real long hair. It was just like collar length. I still didn't have a good look at his face. And then I saw he changed. He went from like a 100-year-old sailor to a handsome 30-year-old. And that was telling me that wherever he was from, there was no time. Time and age meant nothing. And then the city disappeared, and we were in a isolated country dirt road. And he was showing me all roads lead to everywhere. No time, no age, no distance. And he pulled up his collar, and he turned around and stared at me right in the face. He wanted me to see what he was like. And then he opened his eyes because his eyes were empty. But at this point, I looked into his eyes, and Keith, I saw everything that ever happened to everybody, everywhere, all at the same time. And I couldn't take it. Just instantly, I just was knocked off my feet and fell down. And when he says every knee shall bow, he means it, because the human being cannot handle looking into the eyes of God. Can't be done. And I was scared. Here's this almighty being. I'm begging at his feet, and he lifts me up and looks me right in the eye, this time without showing me all that. And he hugged me, put his hands on both my cheeks, and said, "Well done." And then he turned and walked away, but his feet didn't touch the ground. He lifted up his robe, and they shined. It was like a glowing light. And then he dropped the robe back down, so I couldn't see that. And he said, "I'll be back shortly. Be patient. Occupy yourself." And then he drifted away again and turned around and said, "Happy birthday," like something's going to happen on my birthday someday. The next thing I knew, the country road disappeared. I'm in the dark world, and he's gone. And I hear this beast somewhere going, and it was off in the distance waiting to make sure that the friendly being was gone. He's scared to death of Jesus. And the reason he's scared to death is because he was turned into a monster. He was the most beautiful angel of all at first, but now he has the ears of a jackal, which are stiff and pointed straight up, like maybe some artist rendition. You could picture them as horns, but they're not. They're jackal ears. His skin is reptilian. He's got the skin of a snake. His eyes are slits, like you see in 100 Martian movies. He has no jawbone. His jaw just flaps in the wind. Well, there's no wind, it just flaps. So he's part jackal or wolf, and he's part fish, he's part serpent. Jesus branded him from the top of his head down to the bottom of his chin, and from side to side is this raised welt of a cross, like he got branded with a cross. He's very drab color. He's brown and green, no color to him. His body, the upper half of his body is thin and muscular. His arms are very, very long. And his claws, for his fingers, he has claws. His legs are thick like that of a T-Rex. And he has the tail of a giant crocodile or a dragon. And again, I heard him getting closer, going, and then he grabbed me, and his claw went halfway up my leg, my calf. He picked me up. He was going to smash me to death. He hated my guts. He didn't want to kill me right away. He wanted to prolong the terror. He wanted to scare me to death. And he shouted no 6 times, like, no, 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 no. And he started to swing me down to kill me. And Jesus came back and just lifted me away and rocked me in his arms.
Does any of this still happen to you to present day?
Every time I think it's over, something happens. Every time I move, something happens.
Michael, many years ago, and I told of this in my book, The Divine Principle Anchoring Heaven on Earth. Toward the back, there's a chapter called My Revelation. Keep in mind, this is some years ago before I began my conscious walk down metaphysical spirituality, I guess you could say. I was taken out of my body by Christ, and it was the beginning of a new day. It was dawn. And even though it was dark, I was 50 feet off the ground, and there was rolling hills everywhere as far as the eye can see, and there were men everywhere that covered every square inch of this expanse. And they were divided in cages of about 30 men per cage. I don't mean cage like you're in jail, but the fence was high enough just to separate them. And each group of men had a different colored jumpsuit on. The first, to the infinite east, they were wearing the purest white jumpsuits that you can imagine. And there was a gradation of colors. From white, it went to cream, and cream, it went to yellow, and yellow went to orange, and so forth and so on. All the way to the infinite west, the suits finally became black. And Jesus was all around me, and he manifested a platform for everyone to see him down below. But keep in mind, metaphorically, I'm the same height with Jesus, 50 feet off of the earth. And though they couldn't see me, I could see Christ, and I can see what happened as he made his appearance. He manifested a platform to stand on and did not have a public address system. He began to speak, and the whole land began to reverberate. And when he started talking, their shouting throngs, their arms would thrust to the sky, and they would all begin to yell the word Christ as a mantra, affirming that we are ready. But when I saw Jesus, when I first saw him, I began to genuflect and get on my knees. And he told me, Keith, stand up, my brother. You are my equal. And then when they saw him, they did the same. And he said, I want all of you to stand up. The time has come. And then let it begin. And then with one final wave of his hand, whatever it is, it started. And he looks to me and says, Keith, do you want to become a part of this world and become active with the change? I said, I would do anything for you. Next thing you know, I'm standing among the men shouting with the shouting throngs, throwing my fist up in heaven, going, oh my God, I'm in the experience. And then there was this mist of smoke, white mist, and I knew it was the dove. And it began to blanket the men in white. And everyone began to sink into the earth as this cocoon-like pod would cover them. And when it was my turn, I had no idea what to expect. The mist hits me and a pod covers me and I sank into the earth and I black out. Long story short, after slumbering for a while, Jesus taps me on the knee and says, Keith, wake up. Are you ready? And I said, ready for what? And he proceeds to tell me about the world above us is in a war, engaged in a hopeless battle of separation. But I, as the Alpha and the Omega, am here to make sure that doesn't happen. So I am very much familiar with these experiences with Christ. And so mine does not happen, has not happened to me in years. And so I was curious to know if this was an ongoing event for you.
Yes, it's been ongoing for 40 years. In my book, I wrote about, I thought it was over, but time is not an element where I came from. As soon as I let my guard down, Satan is right there. So he's always come back. As soon as I think it's over, it's not over. 2 years ago, I moved into this log cabin where I live now. And Satan attacked me on the very first day. Everything went black. I couldn't find my way out of the room. I couldn't see. I couldn't find the doors. I couldn't find any windows. And it was daytime, and it was pitch black. And I got so scared, I just urinated all over myself. I have been so frightened, I couldn't breathe. I had to manually pump air into my lungs. I remember one time after Satan grabbed me, I came back into my room. I woke up, it was 3:15 in the morning. Cat jumped up on my face like he always did. And then Satan crossed over from the spirit realm into my room at the foot of my bed. And my cat scratched me really hard and ran away. And my adrenaline was pumping so bad, I tried to pull my feet away from the end of the bed, but he grabbed me again in this world while I was right awake. And he picked me up out of the bed and threw me 5 feet against the wall next to my bed. And I turned the light on, and he was gone. And it was just like, what happened was no dream. I'm here, and I'm going to come, and I'm going to kill you in my own time. And I couldn't breathe at that point. I got out of bed, and I ran into the chair in the living room and turned the light on. Tried to dial the phone for my downstairs neighbors. I couldn't get the numbers right, and finally I got it right. And then when he answered the phone, I couldn't breathe. I was just pushing my diaphragm. And he said, Michael, is that you? Is that you? And I go, He said, you want to come down? So I ran down there, and they opened the door. They heard me coming, and I sat in a rocking chair with this. They had like a church window looking out. So I just sat there, didn't say a word. And then the sun came up, and his friend said, what a way to spend Easter sunrise. I said, oh my God, it's Easter. And I just got up and went home.
888-919-2355. 888-919-2355 is the number you call to get onto the air to speak to myself or my guest today, Mr. Michael Mullen. Michael, we're at the bottom of the hour. Would you give out your contact information so my guests can find more about you and your books and the work that you are doing?
They can find everything at waroftheangels.com. I mean, you can order the books anywhere. Amazon, your favorite bookstore, whatever. But the My bio and everything else is at waroftheangels.com.
Michael, if you would, tell me about the War Angel.
That one is weird. Well, they're all...
They all are.
All
yes,
right.
if you would, tell me about that.
I was taken out of my body again, but I wasn't asleep this time. I was awake. And I walked into the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and I started pulling the skin off of my body, big chunks off of my face. And beneath my face was this ancient face with these, not really tattoos because they were raised. And then I started pulling the skin off of my chest, and I had wings, and my face was sitting on top of wings. Like if you can imagine going to the state fair or something and you put your face in one of these photo booth things and you're, you know, some type of monster or Bigfoot or whatever. And I flew. I was on top of a building overlooking the city, and I was looking down. I was some type of a warrior, and I saw these giant lions just walking all over town, thousands of them. And it looked like they were waiting for orders to do whatever it is they were supposed to do. And later, I just knew that was the 144,000 witnesses waiting for orders. And I just flew off of that building, then ended up going back where I was and put my eyes back in, because I even pulled my eyes out and I had these empty slits like I saw with Jesus. So I didn't really need my eyes to see or my skin from my body or anything. So that's why I said that one's a little weird.
Michael, I have a question for you. I have an understanding, as I know it to be, of, and I've mentioned this a few times on this radio program, that when we often hear how angels battle, the war in heaven kind of thing. For me, it's easy to understand as a metaphysician, a spiritual teacher, and as well as all the experiences I've had on the other side. A little bit of common sense, a little bit intellect, a little bit of intuition, all those combined together to make a belief gumbo, if you will. If you take a pin flashlight and you walk into a super dark room, a greatly dark room, the smallest flashlight dissipates the darkness without even trying. Its very presence dissipates the darkness. So the question I have for you, sir, is from your experience now, because you might have seen this on different levels than I, you might know the mechanics of how it works. How do angels, quote, fight?
I did that a lot. He showed me how to fight. First time was in my secular job. My secretary was scared to death. She said there's something in her basement. So I went back to her basement, and then later that night, I was removed from my body, and I chased this fallen angel in the dark world. And it was scared to death of me, and I just flew around and around and around and imploded it. The energy comes out of your eyes. You get the energy. Now, the next time I saw something like that, I was chasing it and feeling real cocky, and it turned around, and it was one of Satan's high-ranking fallen angels. And it hurt me bad. It shot a bolt of energy in my eyes down to my guts and just almost burned me alive. And Jesus was letting me know that I'm not doing a thing. It's all him. And the way you get the energy is you raise your hands up in the air, palms up towards God, and he sends it down through your arms. And that's how Moses won his battles. You know, when he raised his arms like that, they were winning the battles. When he lowered his arms, they'd lose the battles. So Aaron had to prop him up so they could win. So raising your arms has a lot to do with it.
Tell me, if you would, about Corporation Evil.
I was taken to this high rise, and there were people lined up down the hallway, down the high rise building, lined up down the street, looking for work, a job. And then I was taken into this large corporation room with this giant executive meeting table, and people were begging to clean the table, to clean the halls, to do anything for a job. And I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it was something like this. This is who you should fear, the corporations. The corporations are running the world. And I think people can see that now. You mentioned something about a tiny little light.
Yes.
I saw that same thing where Satan beat me. I was down on the ground. He was grunting and groaning and crawling all over me, and his tail crawling across my face, and he was getting ready to kill me, but he wasn't in a hurry. He wanted me to be tortured. And again, this was in the dark world. I could see a little bit then. I'd grown used to it. And then I saw this tiny little light, about 1 trillion light years away, but it's exactly like you described, Keith. It lights up the dark world. This little bitty, and it got closer and closer and closer, and it was a living being. And it went right inside my body and jerked me up like I was a puppet or a marionette. And it raised my hands up in the air, and it shot energy through me, out of my eyes, and into Satan, and knocked him down on the ground. And it was burning and burning and burning. And then he brought down this fiery furnace in a sphere. And he imprisoned Satan in that fire sphere. And it was so painful that I cried for Satan. I mean, he tried to scream, but there was no air. He couldn't make a noise, and his face was distorted. And I begged the creature inside of me doing it, because I wouldn't do anything. He would just let me witness what hell was. And I begged him to ease the pain, stop it, but he turned up the heat, hotter and hotter, and I cried, stop it, and it got hotter and hotter, and when it couldn't get any hotter, when it was as much pain as anybody could ever inflict, he cast him into outer darkness. And people think hell is going to be this big party where all the sinners go and have parties. But it's not. You're separated from God, and you're burning on your own. And that was when the first time I encountered that little bitty light. Somebody else encountered that too. When I had a website, I was dealing with Satanists and pagans and witches and everybody like that. And this crystal witch used to come and yell at me and cuss me out, and she said she was on her way to a midnight coven, and she saw this little light from the sky come down and sit in the car right by her, and she turned around and threw away everything, every ritualistic item she had, and went and got baptized. So that's somebody else who saw that light.
Michael, you described Satan in such detail, all the different characteristics that makes up his being, I guess you can say. And even though you were operating and playing, to use the word, hanging out in this spiritual dimension, the way you described it is as if almost there was some sort of physicality there, because you described what it looked like, which could be an image, of course, but you also described that there was pain involved, which is definitely a physical attribute. So in this spiritual dimension, was there any sort of physicality?
Yes, absolutely. I have an actual drawing of Satan. I had a composite artist. I mean, felt sorry for him, took him about 100 tries to draw, but that's exactly Satan. They got the full body picture of him on War of the Angels 1 and a big facial picture of him on War of the Angels 2. And I've seen him so many times. And now I understood why 40 years enabled me to write War of the Angels 2. War of the Angels 1 was about me. Me. Things that happened to me. War of the Angels 2 has nothing to do with things that happened to me. It is the only book I'm aware of where it goes from the very beginning to the very end as told from Satan's viewpoint. I use the Hebrew pronunciation. He takes a life of his own. It's the hardest thing I've ever written because I had to keep stopping myself and say, no, that's starting to be from God's viewpoint. This is from Satan's viewpoint. And the whole thing is a battle between Satan and I am. And it's 400 pages of an accumulation of 40 years about the very first rebellion in heaven all the way down to the 1,000-year reign here and beyond. And I've had people tell me that for the first time they really understand. I could not have written that book if Jesus had not taken me out of my body and put me into every situation that I needed to write that. I know Satan. I know what he thinks. I know what he looks like. I know what he feels like. I know what drives him. I could not have done that without the thing that's happened over my life.
Michael, I asked you about the physicality that's there. The reason I asked you that, because what came to mind is Padre Pio, the man of the cloth, a Catholic priest, some years ago. This man was powerful, so powerful. He had stigmata. He would bleed the wounds of Christ. His blood would smell like flowers, and so forth and so on. And this happened regularly. When his, I guess you can say his helpers, associates, would help him prepare for bed for any particular night. When they would shut the door, and there are many stories surrounding this, that demons would manifest themselves in his bedroom, and he would go into physical battle. He would have fist fights with these demons. The next morning, he would come out of his room to start his day. He was black and blue. They beat the crap out of him. I mean, that these altercations were really happening. And one of my spiritual mentors and I, we were just playing with some ideas, and I want to ask you this question here shortly. That I often wondered that that because he's such a devout, holy man, that because of his Catholic upbringing and how he might view the spiritual dimensions and how energies play themselves out, that maybe it wasn't really physical beings at all, that he needed something to, quote, combat in order to transmute the energy from dark to light. And that's, quote, the excuse that his subconscious made so that he can have such exchanges to be successful in the transmutation. Do you feel that this may apply to you in some way?
What happened to me was very real. There was never any doubt. It was a real physical being that came into my room while I was awake many times, picked me up and threw me into the wall. There's no doubt about it. Now, it's to the point now where, okay, one time not too long ago, I saw him. He manifested in my room, in an office where I was. And I just looked up and said, I don't have time for this. Get out of here.
So you're somewhat, I guess I can't speak for you, but I'm guessing that you're are used to it by now, to where the fear factor, the shock and awe, and the gasping for air by the very sight of a spontaneous presence, you're somewhat conditioned to this now, yes?
Yeah, it doesn't bother. The only thing that bothers me is being startled. Like in the
Well, that'd be true across the board for anybody from anything that would just pop out of nowhere.
The movie Amityville Horror, that wasn't scary to me at all. But when a black cat jumped at the window, that did, because I wasn't expecting it. But other than that, he told me how to fight him. Jesus showed me the weapon.
Please share.
By the power of his blood. By the power of his blood, it makes Satan fall down, and you can actually walk on him. He has no energy whatsoever, and he's got to crawl out of there. I told my two sons that. They've both been attacked. My little one, when he was 4 years old, a demon came into his room, and he said he had big teeth and was going to kill him. And my little one sat up in his bed and said, "Get out of here. I'm going to dump Jesus' blood all over you." And it ran away, and he never came back.
Michael from the chat room, Max wants to ask a question. His question is, how has this experience changed your view of God and Satan, heaven and hell, light and dark? Good question.
It went from knowing nothing to not worrying about it. I know the result. I read the end of the book. I know what's going to happen in the end. And the good guys win. So the recurring theme that Jesus told me over and over was, do not worry. Everything that he attacked, do not worry. Do not worry. And here's, if I got to sum all that up, I was taking care of my grandmother who had Alzheimer's before she was dying. I lived in her furnished attic. And one evening, while I was awake, I was taken out of my body and sat to the side of my bed as I watched my body sit up against the headboard, and had the most awesome, whoever was living inside of me, I know who it was now, having this conversation with his voice in the air. And I had never heard such romantic language. I had no idea what they were saying, but you could tell by the fluctuation in the voices, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you know what I mean? And It was such a loving conversation. And I was so in awe. And then when it was done and I was put back in my body, I just looked up in the air and I was saying, wow, to be loved that much. And then I heard the voice say, and this is the message for everybody. He said to me, I love you too. And that just made me cry. This
I would imagine so.
Powerful being says, I love you too.
What is the point of your name being Michael? Is there some relationship to your name being Michael associated with the spiritual realm?
I don't know. I saw my grandmother, when she was out of her head, came upstairs. I was still trying to write that USS Indianapolis book. People tell me I wrote War of the Angels just so I could get rich. But I had every major publisher in the country. Harold Keebler, senior editor, special project committee at Doubleday. Simon & Schuster's, Paramount Movies calling me saying, don't sign anything until we make the last bid. And then here comes Jesus. Do not write that. Write this. And 10 years later, because this book was written based on top secret papers given to me by President Gerald Ford before he left office. And another author found that 10 years later, and he was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for an entire year, and sold movie rights to a movie called Mission of the Sharks, and he made $5 million. So when somebody tells me that I gave up $5 million just so I can be rich, yeah, right. They told me if it really happened, you'd take a lie detector test. So they hounded me. So I took a lie detector test, and I told this one skeptic, I said, there, it says I'm telling the truth. Now do you believe me? He said, you're not telling the truth. You're insane, and you just think you're telling the truth. Then he said, if it really happened, you'd be giving that book away for free. So I gave him a copy for free. Contacted him a couple of weeks later, said, what'd you think of it? Did you read it? And he says, no, if you got to give it away for free, it's not worth anything. So people are not going to believe. If they don't want to, you believe or you don't believe, that's not up to me. But I had thousands of people tell me they were contacted by the spiritual realm one way or another, depending on which God you worshiped. If you're a pagan or something like that, they would scare you to death, and people would say everything was just fine in my life until this. Or if you love Jesus, then you would hear voices confirming that. I had soldiers in the Middle East tell me now they understand what's going on in the world. But I just get carried away. I've got so many things going on in my mind. I forgot what your question was.
That's okay, brother. I'm looking, excuse me, at your list of talk points, and there's some. Sadly, we can't get to all of them, but it'd be great to get you back on the show in the near future. In the book, you wrote about planets and wizards, and that's piquing my curiosity really well right now.
I was downtown, and people were out having fun. It must have been a weekend night or something. And they were just mingling outside, having parties, a drink in their hand, and looking up at the sky in the most awesome light show of planets. And streaking back and forth, and planets going around in circles and everything. And then I looked up, and I saw wizards. I looked at a newsstand, and there was front page covers of wizards, and they came alive. They came off the newsstand, and they were there. And I started screaming to people, don't look, it's Satan. And they didn't pay any attention to me. And I said, you don't scare me, Solomon and T. That's what I called him. T is for Tammuz. He's the Babylonian Antichrist, son of God. Solomon is a word that they use for leader. And that's what that was about. Solomon T came there, and they were using the sky and the planets and astrology and everything else like just to captivate the crowds.
In your book, War of the Angels 2, your subtitle is Allah. Tell me about what is the meaning of that being the subtitle, and how does that apply to your book, War of the Angels 2, Allah?
He's Satan. They're using Islam to bring about Chrislam, which will be the religion of the tribulation period. Even Pope Francis right now is saying that we worship the same God. Well, we don't worship the same God. And after the rapture, the only Christians left are going to be so wishy-washy. Islam will never accept Jesus as the Son of God. Christians will easily accept Jesus as the prophet. He's a good man. He's a nice man, but he doesn't necessarily have to be the Son of God. So therefore, you can merge the two together in Chrislam. And people always want to know about the false prophet. They're just so mixed up. Is the Pope the false prophet, this and that? No. The false prophet, they're going to play a trick. Satan is going to incarnate the body of a human here. I pretty much think I know who it is, but I'm not going to get into that. The false prophet is the false Jesus that looks like he's descending from heaven. And he's going to have some magic tricks and pick a card, any card or whatever.
Right.
And he's going to get people, hey, I'm Jesus. Everybody's going to believe he's Jesus. And Islam, of course, calls him the prophet. but he's the false prophet because that's satanic.
Michael, we are at the top of the hour. The show is coming to a close. Quickly, if you can give me an answer, what do you call hocus pocus Christians?
Jesus Christ went to the cross so you can be rich and famous. Jesus Christ was put to death so he could be your magic genie or rub his belly 3 times and you get magic wishes.
Understood.
It has nothing to do with sin. It has nothing to do with divinity. It's just, let's go have a picnic and play a softball game. That's a wishy-washy Christian.
Michael, we're at the top of the hour. I really appreciate you being here in Center of Light Radio. Is there something you would like to leave us with that we can look forward to as a final thought?
I haven't even scratched the surface. It's like the Titanic hits the iceberg and you look out and say, is that an ice cube? I know what the Star of Bethlehem is.
Tell me, please.
Star of Bethlehem, I don't know if we have time. I've seen it twice.
We have about 1 minute. If you could squeeze it in a minute, that'd be perfect.
The Star of Bethlehem was not some star way up in the sky that the wise men hopped on their camels and followed, because that's absolutely impossible. It's 4 cherubim flying in formation. You can read about it in Ezekiel. There's one out front with its hands outstretched. The one behind him grabs onto his ankles. And then there's 2 on either side holding on, and they glow. And it looks like a cross. And they go this way and that way anyway without having to turn. And it shines like a spotlight. And God used that on 2 occasions to show me which way to go, because I was homeless for 15 years. So the Star of Bethlehem is a flying group of cherubim.
Mr. Michael Mullen, thank you for being on Center of Light Radio. Listening audience, you can find more about Michael and order his books. His website is www.waroftheangels.com. Make sure you go check out that site. Delve a little more into my phenomenal guest that you hear tonight here on Center of Light Radio. Michael, thank you very much. You're welcome back anytime, sir. We'd like to hear more of your spiritual adventures, though they may not be on purpose. I really enjoyed your presence here, sir, and your input to what's going on in levels that we cannot see nor experience with our senses.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be on the show.
Please come back anytime. Everyone, Mr. Michael Mullen, waroftheangels.com. Keith Anthony Blanchard here, your host for Center of Light Radio, every Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard or Daylight Time. Eastern Time. Let's just call it Eastern Time. Hello, guests in the chat room. Your presence here is appreciated greatly. Remember, when you lay down at night, call in Jesus. Call in that which is divine, that which makes your heart sing. That way you know you're in alignment with that which is the truth. Bring that in as you breathe in and out with the intention for something greater than you always have known. If God breathed life into man, then it should make sense that when you breathe, you are bringing in the life force. You are bringing in the cosmic stream. You're breathing in that which is whole and complete. My name is Keith Anthony Blanchard, your host of Center of Light Radio. Peace, love, and light to you, and always remember, ease into bliss. Good evening. Oh, by the way, next week, my guest is going to be Ann Purcell, and we're going to be speaking about, my notes here, enlightenment, the 7 states of consciousness. Make sure you catch that show. centeroflightradio.com. Fill out that subscription form. I will be sending out the newsletter tomorrow. Peace, love, and light. Good evening.
See inside.